What is the most statistically improbable thing that has happened to you? At a summer job looking for uranium in the NWT of Canada, the job entailed walking through the woods while using a gamma-ray detector to find boulders having uranium. The theory was if you found a boulder that was hot, one could trace it back to where it originated, and maybe a uranium mine is found. One day during a typical survey, I found a piece of moss that made the detector absolutely go nuts, but no boulder. Narrowed it down to a piece of moss no bigger than my pinky fingernail. So I bagged it and flagged the location and went back to camp. Sample was sent to Canada's Atomic Commission to find out that it was a fleck of radioactive isotope from the Russian Cosmos satellite that hit the ETH near Baker Lake, NWT, Canada in 1977. The odds of finding this given the huge area really was statistically improbable. I was on vacation in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and noticed a very distinctive looking couple while eating in a restaurant. Think wild hair, tattoos, and very unique wardrobe. Thought they looked pretty cool and didn't think much of it again after that. Fast forward 7 years and I'm in a Costa Coffee in Edinburgh, Scotland. Same couple is drinking coffee at the table next to me. I couldn't leave without checking, so I introduced myself, told them my story, and turns out they live in Buenos Aires and were on vacation in Scotland. 7 years and a half a world away and we bump into each other is crazy. Was stationed with a guy in Japan who was originally from Sierra Leone, transferred to another base in DC. Lived in a condo complex in northern VA. One of my neighbors was a cousin of the guy I was stationed with in Japan. Yuzunito. I was sitting on a park bench leaning backwards, stretching and feeling the grass on the elevated land behind me. I randomly picked a plant. Person I was with, "You got a 4-leaf clover." And I was like, oh, they must all be like that. I assumed it was some random plant cluster that all looked like 4-leaf clovers, and I was wrong. I totally blindly backwards grabbed a 4-leaf clover on a random park bench. I lost my driver's license on a work trip in a different state than where I was living. Moved from the address and apartment on my driver's license. 3 years later moved back to the same apartment complex, different apartment, and in the mail room throwing all my junk mail in the large trash can in said room. Saw the envelope on top in the trash can had my name on it. At different address. Opened it, and my lost driver's license from 3 years ago, nothing else in the envelope. Yuzunito. Picking the slowest checkout lane in the grocery store every single time for the last 15 or so years. I transferred within the post office to a new facility after 10 years. My first night working there, I opened a tray of mail that contained only one letter. It was a birthday card to a person with the same name as a guy who had been my best friend in college 10 years prior. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly a decade, and I remember wondering if it was the same person's somewhat common name in my area. I got back to work, and a few hours later the letter carriers started arriving to start their shifts. I said something to another clerk and a letter carrier recognized me, and it turns out it was the friend from college. He had become a letter carrier 8 years prior to that day. I asked if he had a birthday coming up, and he said it was his birthday that day. Witnessed someone drop their phone whilst getting onto an elevator, and the phone fell perfectly through the crack between the elevator and the hallway floor. It was a pretty chunky phone with a case on. Can't have had more than a millimeter of clearance on either side, but I'll be darned if it didn't fall at the exact right angle. We all kinda just stood there in silent disbelief for the first 5 floors or so of the elevator ride. Witnessed a suicide bombing from 200 feet in the air working on a cell tower, less than a kilometer away. I met both President Obama and Trump completely randomly within a few years of each other. GeoGuessr dropped me outside of my house. I'm on an ISIS kill list. Many years ago there was some kind of hack on the interwebs and many enlisted PPL had our names and addresses compiled and released on a kill list. I was informed I was on the list by 2 FBI agents who first came to my apartment and left a card. When I called the number on the card, they wouldn't tell me over the phone why they wanted to meet in person. I have been anxious before in my life, but I had never been. I wonder why the FBI wants to speak to me level of nervous prior to this. I was really racking my brain trying to figure out what law I had broken to get in this much trouble. I agreed to meet them at a restaurant near my job, and I brought a trusted coworker who sat nearby to keep an eye on things. It was shockingly underwhelming. It was a middle-aged guy and a young ginger kid. They were legit agents. They told me I was on this list and not to tell anyone. I asked if anybody from the list had actually been killed, and they said no. I asked how many people total on the list, and they said over 3,000 in the US on this list. Apparently this happens somewhat often, and all have to be notified in person. $150 from a scratch-off, cashed it out, and was literally mugged outside of the store. First time I ever bought a scratch-off, first time I was ever mugged. Needless to say, I never bought another one. I ran into a semi that ran a stop sign, doing 50 kph. No airbags went off in a 2009 Explorer and walked away. The police officer that responded was quite shocked that I was walking around taking pics in high-vis clothing. He was expecting to be calling for the Jaws to get me out. Should have taken him up on the offer to be transported to hospital to be checked out. Ended up tearing my shoulder out the back of the socket. Not me, but I knew a woman whose husband died of a rare form of brain cancer in his 30s. She eventually moves on, meets a new guy, remarries. And he dies of another rare kind of brain cancer before he's 50. I can't even imagine how that might fuck someone up. Losing 2 spouses to brain cancer like that, and so young. TBH being alive. I was born 26 weeks, one of triplets, the only one to survive. My mother said doctors would literally come into the hospital room daily saying either I would die soon, or if stayed alive wouldn't walk, have brain damage, etc. I was in an incubator for quite a while as soon as I came out. I came home my original due date. Long story short, through surgeries, therapy, etc. I'm now 25 with mild CP and work with adults with disabilities.